Late in 1941, American ordnance officers confronted a crisis that would transform military chemistry forever. The U.S. Army possessed no man-portable weapon capable of stopping a German Panzer III from the front. British intelligence pouring in from North Africa showed Rommel's tanks shrugging off every anti-tank rifle the Allies fielded, especially the standard .55 caliber Boys rifle, Britain's frontline answer to German armor, which could barely dent the 50 mm frontal plates of even the lighter Panzer models. American arsenals looked worse. Springfield Armory's experimental T3 anti-tank rifle existed only as dusty blueprints, while the deeper issue lay in the nation's outdated explosive chemistry infrastructure. TNT plants built during World War I had been mothballed for 2 decades, their equipment rusted and obsolete, and when the War Department attempted to revive them in early 1941, they discovered that modern German armor required far more explosive power than TNT could deliver pound for pound. At Picatinny Arsenal, chemical engineers ran shape-charge tests that September using TNT-filled warheads fired against captured French armor plates. But results were dismal. Barely 3 inches of penetration through homogeneous steel. Worse still, German intelligence suggested their newest tanks featured face-hardened armor that would resist even more. America's entire approach to military explosives had stagnated since 1918. Ordnance officers were still specifying TNT for everything despite knowing Germany and Britain had moved on. Both nations using a powerful compound known as hexogonar DX, though American chemists knew almost nothing about synthesizing it safely at scale. Classified British reports that did cross the Atlantic described catastrophic factory accidents, including a 1940 Woolwich explosion that killed 17 workers and injured 43 more. Yet German tanks continued thickening their armor. By December 1941, Panzer IVs on the Eastern Front sported 80 mm frontal plates. American infantry would be forced to fight these monsters with little more than grenades and desperation. At Aberdeen Proving Ground, the Army's rocket branch possessed experimental shape-charge warheads, but they were mounted on awkward launcher platforms requiring 3-man crews. What frontline soldiers needed was something a single man could carry, aim, and fire before a tank's machine guns ripped him apart. The chemistry to make such a weapon possible existed in British and German labs, but in American hands it might as well have been alchemy. Into this problem stepped Edward Uhl, a 26-year-old Army lieutenant who never intended to revolutionize anti-tank warfare. He merely wanted to fix the persistent failings of every rocket launcher prototype crossing his desk in early 1942. All designs required complicated sights, heavy shoulder stocks, and elaborate firing mechanisms. His superior, Colonel Leslie Skinner, had struggled with rocket-propelled grenades since 1940, but none could deliver both portability and accuracy. The breakthrough came one spring afternoon in May 1942. Almost laughably simple, Uhl picked up a length of scrap electrical conduit 5 feet long, about 2 inches in diameter, held it to his shoulder like a crude telescope, and realized the rocket's exhaust could vent harmlessly behind the shooter. No breech mechanism, no recoil system, just an open tube. Skinner immediately recognized the elegance. Within 72 hours they had welded crude iron sights onto the conduit, attached wooden shoulder stocks, and wired a basic electrical firing circuit from flashlight batteries and doorbell wire. On May 14, 1942, the first test took place. Uhl loaded a 3.5-pound rocket with a shape-charge warhead into the rear of the tube, aimed at a frame 60 yards away, and fired. The rocket whooshed forward in a trail of white smoke and detonated on target. But success against wood meant nothing. They needed results against armor. Sections of a captured French Somme tank, 45 mm homogeneous steel, were brought to the range. On May 21st, Uhl fired 3 rockets. One punched through cleanly, leaving a baseball-sized hole. Another penetrated and sent spalling fragments 30 feet behind the plate. The third struck high but still carved a 4-inch crater. Colonel Skinner snatched the launcher and examined it like a magic wand. During a June demonstration, Major General Gladian Barnes remarked that the tube resembled the comedic gaspipe trombone played by radio comedian Bob Burns' The Bazooka. The name stuck instantly. By July 1942, the M1 rocket launcher had official designation and a 5,000-unit production order. But the launcher was only half the equation. Its warhead still used conventional explosive mixes that produced barely 4 inches of penetration to pierce 6 inches of German steel. America needed chemistry it had previously banned. The breakthrough arrived in August 1940 to inside a manila envelope carried by a Royal Navy courier. 23 pages of British research detailing Composition B, a mixture of 60% RDX, 40% TNT, with a touch of wax for desensitization. It delivered 1.6 times the explosive power of TNT in shaped charges. RDX had a strange history, first synthesized in 1898 by German chemist Georg Friedrich Henning as a potential medicine, rediscovered by Germany in the 1920s, weaponized by 1935, and investigated by Britain beginning in 1939 after captured German ordnance revealed its extraordinary potential. But RDX was viciously unstable during synthesis. The British method involved reacting hexamine with concentrated nitric acid, producing huge heat loads. If the temperature rose above 25 C at the wrong moment, it could detonate spontaneously, the wool, which explosion being the most infamous example. American chemists spent September 1940 to studying the British formulas. At the University of Michigan, Dr. Werner Emanuel Bachmann proposed modifications using acetic anhydride to buffer the reaction and stabilize nitric acid concentration. By October, he had safely synthesized small RDX batches. The War Production Board immediately authorized construction of 3 RDX plants: Holston, Tennessee, Wabash River, Indiana, and Radford, Virginia. The first American-made composition be left Holston in January 1943, pressed into Bazooka warheads. It improved penetration from 3.2 to 4.5 inches, but German armor was still ahead. Panthers with sloped ADM and placed effectively 6 inches of vertical steel were entering production. Infantry needed more punch. Dr. George Kistiakowsky, the Ukrainian-born Harvard explosive expert, famous for his distaste for bureaucracy, reviewed the Aberdeen test data early 1943 and recognized a flaw. The explosive inside the shaped charge cone was too brittle, shattering unevenly and compromising jet formation. German pre-war research had shown that finely powdered metals, especially aluminum, could improve temperature and consistency of explosive detonation. But aluminum-loaded explosives were banned by both British and American safety regulations due to increased friction and static sensitivity. Kistiakowsky ignored the rule. In April 1943, he mixed RDX, TNT, aluminum powder, and wax in quantities explicitly forbidden: 40% RDX, 40% TNT, 17% aluminum, 3% wax, creating a gray, waxy compound he called Composition B+. In May 1943, he secretly tested small-shaped charges on Harvard property. Penetration increased by roughly 35% compared to standard composition, be a 2-pound test charge blasted through 3 inches of steel. Kistiakowsky formally reported the results in June 1943, expecting immediate shutdown. Instead, with American infantry suffering in Sicily against panzers and tigers, desperation silenced objections. By August, the Ordnance Department quietly authorized field trials of Composition B+ in modified M6A3 warheads, instructing production plants to adopt new strict safety protocols: grounding, humidity control, reduced batch sizes to handle explosives 3 times more sensitive than anything previously manufactured. The Normandy hedgerows proved the new warhead's worth. The ancient earthen walls 8 to 12 feet high allowed German panzers to ambush Allied armor at point-blank range. American tank losses skyrocketed, but bazooka teams now carried warheads capable of burning through 6 inches of steel. On June 12, 1944, Staff Sergeant Robert Thompson reported a panzer for ambush at 60 yards. Private Eugene Lucero fired an M6A3 rocket loaded with Composition B, punching straight through the 50mm side armor and detonating internal ammo, blowing the turret 15 feet into the air. First Army statistics showed a 68% kill rate on Panzer IVs from side and rear hits, and even frontal shots had a 41% penetration rate at favorable angles. The 4th Infantry Division claimed 23 armored kills by Bazooka versus only 7 by Shermans during Cherbourg. Panthers were more challenging, but infantry adapted. Lieutenant James Flowers used coordinated bazooka volleys to break Panther tracks, immobilizing them before destroying their thin rear armor. Captured German documents warned tank commanders to avoid American Panzerschreck teams and to maintain distance beyond 150 yards, evidence that Kistiakowsky's forbidden formula had changed. Battlefield doctrine. The physics behind this transformation defied intuition. A shaped charge does not work like a bullet. When Composition B+ detonates behind its copper cone, it collapses the metal into a jet traveling nearly 25,000 feet per second, 23 times the speed of sound, behaving as a superheated fluid capable of eroding steel. Through hydrodynamic penetration, temperature increased from 3,800 Celsius in Composition B to over 4,500 Celsius in Composition B+ due to aluminum oxidation, extending jet coherence and penetration. Cone geometry, copper thickness, standoff distance all had to be perfect. Factories inspected each cone for microscopic flaws and engineered warhead noses to maintain 6 inches of standoff for optimal jet formation. If the warhead struck at an angle, performance dropped. Mass-producing Composition B+ was a separate miracle. Oldsmobile's Lansing plant proposed remote-controlled pressing stations behind 12-foot-thick concrete walls with periscope-style optics for operators. Thousands of newly trained women, like 23-year-old Betty Fitzgerald, learned to handle aluminum-loaded explosive pellets with meticulous caution. Hydraulic presses applied carefully sequenced pressure cycles to avoid heat buildup. By March 1944, Lansing was producing 18,000 warheads daily. By May, 3 plants produced 547,000 monthly, just in time for Normandy. Only 2 fatal accidents occurred in 1944, both in transportation, not production. In the Pacific, Japanese tanks posed little challenge, but concrete bunkers and volcanic caves did. On Iwo Jima and Okinawa, bazookas evolved into bunker busters. Marines like Corporal Tony Stein used multiple rockets to chip away at reinforced pillboxes, carving 18-inch cavities into concrete walls. Engineers developed creative techniques, bouncing rockets off cave walls to reach interior chambers. The M20 Super Bazooka, using 3.5-inch Composition B+ warheads weighing 8.5 pounds, became essential for clearing steel-reinforced cave networks. In Korea, the bazooka story came full circle. Early U.S. forces armed with degraded 1940 for M6A3 rockets failed against Soviet-supplied T-34-85s, but when Marines landed at Incheon carrying fresh M20 Super Bazookas loaded with newly developed Composition before containing 20% aluminum powder, penetration reached 8.5 inches. Soviet technicians later analyzed these warheads, integrating aluminum-enhanced explosives into the RPG-2 and eventually the RPG-7. Thus, every modern anti-tank shaped charge weapon from the M70 to law to the RPG-29 traces its lineage back to the forbidden chemistry Kistiakowsky mixed in a Harvard laboratory in 1943, and to the improvised steel tube Edward Uhl held to his shoulder one spring afternoon in 1942.